So we're nearing the end of this entire series that we've been going through for the last several weeks about life. We've been asking whether or not we've actually been living a good life. Now, we took a step back there to really talk about really just what life consists of. And if you look at your life, you look at my life, and there are a lot of common things that we have that we experience that make up our life. Whether these are the people we meet or the people we lose, maybe it's the money that we make, the money that we lose, our jobs that we love, and sometimes the jobs that we hate, the ebbs and flows of life, the highs and lows of life, the joys and the pains that we experience throughout life, the families that we create. All of these things make up our life, and these are among other things. There's so many other things that we would say that make up our life, but one of the questions we've been wondering or asking, and I don't know if this is one that you've been wondering even throughout your own life, whether we're followers of Jesus or not, is wondering if we're actually living a good life. Now, that can be a subjective question. If I were to ask you, are you living a good life? It might be very subjective, because our tendency might be to compare our life to somebody else's life that seems to have a much better life, a perfect life in comparison to ours. Now, maybe we look at another person's life and say, well, they have a nice car, they have a perfect family, they have all this money, they have a great job. And so we look at them and say, man, they're living a good life, but in comparison, my life isn't that great. And so that's a very subjective point of view on whether or not we're living a good life. And so what we really need is we need an objective standard by which we judge whether or not we're actually living a good life. And that's something that the Bible talks about, that we can live a good life in this world. And so that's what we've been doing throughout this series, is trying to dissect really what it means to live a good life. Now, Jesus tells us that there are things that we need to be doing in our life that matter the most. And I think when we read all the things he says throughout the Sermon on the Mount and even in like Matthew chapter 22 and among other places, what we find is that what Jesus is really trying to get at is that the good life is succeeding in the things that matter the most. Now again, we might have disagreements with that and say, well, I look at my life and everything I do matters, or else I wouldn't be doing it. Raising my kids, or going to work, or mowing the lawn, or doing this, that, and the other. All the things that we do in our life, we would say it matters, right? That we have to do these things. But Jesus says, no, there are two things that matter the most out of everything that we do in life. And he goes back to what he says, that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. And we determined for week one that really these can be summed up in our faith and our character, right? Our faith, so our relationship with God, our character, or our conduct, how we conduct ourselves in the world. And so that's what Jesus says is what matters the most. And so this whole series has been about figuring out how all of that looks in our life. Now, to get into what we're talking about today, and this is sort of, if I were to call it maybe a part two, I might call it part two of what we talked about last week, in which if you haven't seen that one about our work, I recommend you go see that one and then come back, or listen to that one and then come back and listen to this one or watch this one. But the one word I want to start out with today, and this is something we all have in common, and that is this word, busy. Again, it's one thing we have in common because this is the way we describe life. If someone were to ask us, how did our week go? We might turn to them and maybe we'll say, man, I've been busy. Or we describe to the person everything that we've done all week. All the things that we've done are good things, whether it's work, whether it's taking our kids to sports or going to watch a movie, all of these other things. And we're basically telling other people that we are busy, that our schedule was so full that we didn't really have much time for anything else. Now, it's rarely that you've ever asked someone, how their week went, that they turn to you and say, "Oh, well, I didn't really do much because, I had all this free time, so I just decided to do nothing." Usually that's not the case. More likely, we fill our time with so many things that at the end of the day, we end up just being busy. And we're busy with the work of life, or the busyness of life. And we determined last week that when we talk about work, the work that fills all of our life, that we can't think about it narrow-mindedly, right? To think about work as a 8 to 5 job, or a 9 to 5 job, or a salaried job, but that our work consists of everything that we do to make life go, to make life work. So that includes our jobs, that includes caring for our kids, that includes mowing the lawn, that includes cleaning the house, right? Everything that makes life go, that is work, because it requires time, it requires energy on our part. And so we are so consumed throughout our week with the busyness of life, with the work of life, right? That's really what we're communicating to somebody when we say that we're busy, is because we've been working all week. And now in our today's culture, as much as we would want a relief from the busyness of life, our life or our world doesn't allow us the time to take the relief that we want, though it gives us the appearance that it does. Now, for example, most work that we try to do, whether that's our actual jobs or anything else we have to do around the house, we try to get those done in a certain amount of time. Maybe we try to get them done Monday through Friday so that Saturday, Sunday, we can actually have a day off. We can actually have time where we're just resting and we're just relaxing. But we know it never really works out that way. That we work so hard Monday through Friday and then have Saturday and Sunday completely off. Because more likely on the days that you have off, maybe even from your actual job, that you're busy trying to do all the other things that you didn't have time to do throughout the week. And so really, you're not really having a day off, you're just playing catch up with all the other days of the week. Because the fact is, and the reality is that there's always work to do. There's always another email to be sent. There's always another diaper to be changed. There's always another lawn to be mowed. There's always kids to be taken care of, right? There's always something to do, even garbage, always one to take out. There's always dishes that need to be done, right? There is work that always has to be done. And so there's seemingly no relief from the busyness that we experience in life. And we're taught early on that I think we should be okay with this busyness of life, because many of us were taught early on that we have to work hard for whatever it is that we want. I mean, that really is the American dream, right? That the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of these things, they take work to attain. And so we're taught early on, it's ingrained in us that we need to work hard for all of these things. I know for me, I was born in poverty, and so trying to come out of that, it took some work to get into opportunities that weren't afforded to my family. I had to work extra hard to get those opportunities, to work harder in school, to work harder in college, and all of these other things to get to where I am today. And so we look at all of this, and we're taught to just work hard. But at the end of the day, what are we? We're tired, we're overworked, and sometimes burnt out. They often call this sort of environment that we're in, we call it the rat race of life. That we're on this endless pursuit of trying to be better than somebody else, trying to get ahead of somebody else, whether that's financially, whether that is positionally, or in some other case, it's all of this endless pursuit of trying to be better than somebody else. So it's this rat race, but you see, at the end of the day, we end up just being rats, and not just rats, we're tired rats, we're overworked rats because of the busyness of life that we've allowed to consume us, and then eventually we become burnt out rats as well. And now, even though life, or the busyness of life, or the work of life causes us to feel this way, it causes us to feel tired and causes us to feel overworked, we do still wear our busyness as a badge of honor. So if there were a Cub Scouts just for life, I think we would probably do what we could to earn that badge where it says that we've been the busiest person around. We wear it around so that everyone can be proud of us. It used to be that people were impressed by people's leisure activities, the exotic vacations they used to take, or maybe sometimes the things that they had. And that's sort of the case today too. But it's even more the case now that we are more focused on people's busyness, that we look at them as like, oh, they're important. And so, yeah, it's something to be proud of in our culture, right? That's what we tell people, that you're busy, you're important, you're wanted, you're needed, you're valued. And so you should embrace the busyness of life that you have. But what do we really mean when we say that we're busy? So someone asks us, how did our week go? And we turn to them, we say that we are busy. Like, what do we really mean when we say that? Well, I think first and foremost, we say, well, we really think I'm a big deal. That we really do believe that we are highly valued, and we might be, that we are wanted, and we might be, by our jobs, by other people. And so our schedules are always filled, and we say, kind of in a prideful kind of way, maybe, in a proud way, we say, yeah, I'm a big deal. That's why I'm so busy. That's why my schedule is always so full. Or maybe we're saying, well, I just don't have it together. Now, again, we don't say these explicitly when we say that we're busy, but I think the senses sort of come out. But we say that I just don't have it together. That perhaps you're busy right now in life because you're trying to catch up on all the things that you weren't able to do because you didn't manage your time well. And so that could be the case as well. But I think honestly, if we were to take an honest look at all of this, look deep down, I think when we say we're busy, I think there's something that our soul is crying out, that something deep down inside of us is trying to tell us, and I think what it's trying to tell us is that I'm exhausted. I think our souls, our inner being, is trying to say something and scream out through all the busyness that we experience in life, right? Whether it's your actual job or whether it's the things around the house, right? This busyness of life that we are so consumed with, that our soul is crying out and saying, look, I'm tired. I'm exhausted from all of this. There was a lady who used to live, maybe around the corner from us, just right down the road. And oftentimes when we would pass by her house and we would go take our daughter to daycare, we would see her out there most mornings raking her lawn. And she wasn't just like raking leaves. I don't know what she was trying to rake up, but she was vigorously raking her entire lawn. Now, when we pass it almost every morning, you look at it and it was bare. There were some green patches around, but most of it was really bare. Most of it seemed to be hanging on by a thread, that it was hanging on for dear life or survival, that it just wasn't getting the life that it needed. And this lady worked really hard to try to keep her lawn looking great. All the lawns around her looked really awesome, but hers didn't. Now, since then, she has moved out and the next people moved in, and I hardly ever see them out there working on their lawn. I see them cutting the lawn, I see them maybe doing weed eating and things like that. But I never see them working as hard as what this lady did. But you see, now when I look at that lawn as we pass by it every morning, it's actually got new life. It's actually the greenest I've ever seen it. And as I passed by there the other day, I kind of thought how much this is much like life. That when we work so much, when we are so busy with all the tasks of life, that there comes a time where we work so hard, we overwork ourselves, and our lives and our souls are screaming out, saying that, I'm exhausted, saying, I'm tired, saying, there's no life here, I'm bare. And so we need to relook at, or reshape the way we look at everything that we're doing in life. That it's not just about work, but it's also giving us the necessary time to rest. Because you look at that, the people who moved in after this lady, and that lawn has just been given new life. And that's what it was screaming out for. And that's what our souls are screaming out for as well. For new life to be breathed into us. And the only way that's going to happen is not that we just work, but that we also take time to rest. That we take time to rejuvenate. Right? Find something in our lives that gives us the life that we need. Because again, the reality is that life can be difficult. Life is tiring. Life is busy. Life can be exhausting. And it's crying out, our souls are crying out for us to do something different, to bring new life into our souls. Now the bottom line is you need a break. You need a break from the busyness of life. Because of course, yes, we were created for work. But at the same time, we were also created for rest. And I think that's in part what this good life really is that the good life is a restful life. That we were created also to rest from the work that we have been given to do, to toil for here on this earth. Now I think back to what Moses, or the word that Moses got from God. We look at this, and this is the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20. And that's where our passage is going to be here today, Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. And in this particular passage, God prescribes for his people a way to have rest from the work they have done all week. And that's so much of an encouragement to us of what we really need in the busyness of life. Because even though we work Monday through Friday, or try to, and then try to take the weekend off, it never really works out that way. So we need to reframe our week. We need to reframe the way we look at the work that we do, is that we actually need to rest. Because in order for us to finish this life well, we need to start putting in practices into our life that can get us to the finish line. And I think this is what God really prescribes for us. And here's what he says in Exodus 20. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And so when they remembered things, it wasn't just that they brought it to mind, but there was action behind this remembrance. So there was something they had to do. So remember the Sabbath. So for them, this was one day of the week in which they did this, a 24-hour period, which I will recommend for us as when we get to the end here. The Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So this is God's prescription for us, to find rest. And not just in doing things, about telling us what we should not do, but also giving us a prescription of what it is that we should do on these days where we can find rest and rejuvenation and ultimately find rest in God. Now, I don't know if this question I'm going to ask is a personal question. Probably not a personal question. Maybe it's a hard question for you to think about. But maybe it's easy for some. But here it is. When's the last time you had a good night's sleep? You know, there's a running joke online, so if you are a fan of memes online, you go look up and you might type in, good night sleep meme or something, or funny. More than likely you're going to find this particular picture that I'm about to show you. But the running joke is that if you ask someone, when's the last time you had a good night's sleep, that they're going to respond with something like this. A picture of the womb. And yes, that's very true, and maybe it's a little funny that we find that the last time that we had a good night's sleep was we were in our mother's womb. And that might be true for a lot of us, because maybe we can't really remember the last time that we had a good night's sleep. When we think about the busyness of life and the fact that it consumes us, we realize that we actually pride ourselves on doing more on less sleep, or doing more on less rejuvenation, or things that bring us rest. I remember when I was a kid, always having challenges with my friends and always saying, well, let's see who can stay up the longest. All right? We never stayed up past 11 p.m. because nobody could make it that long, but yeah, we would try anyway. It was all the rage in college to pull all-nighters, you're procrastinating, or maybe you just like working down to the wire there, and so you end up working through the night, working into the early morning to get your assignment done. I had a friend in college, at the state school that we were at, they had a 24-hour library, and so he would often go there, bring his sleeping bag. He would sleep for about an hour in around 2 in the morning, and then continue working. So he'd be working all night, go to sleep for an hour, and then work the rest of the day because he had something due that was due the next morning. And so we pride ourselves on working long hours and on very little sleep. And it's obvious from many of our jobs that we do the very same thing. And sometimes we might work late into the night, and even if that means we sleep less, that's okay because our job gets done. So I think what it shows us is that we put a priority on the busyness of life rather than on resting and rejuvenating for the life and the work that we have to do. Right? So we don't put a priority on our sleep. Some years ago, they said in 2018 that the average sleep, or the average time a person slept, was about 6 hours and 17 minutes. That was the national average here in America. And then just a year later, that time went down to 5 hours and 30 minutes. So again, what we're seeing here is a pattern that we value our busyness over resting. We value the work of life rather than just being. Rather than just finding a time where we can be rejuvenated so that we can finish this life well. Now, we asked this question, when's the last time you had a good night's sleep? But maybe we even ask, when's the last time that you actually had a day off? Now, we might say, well, I had Sunday off, but was it really off? You might say, well, I went on vacation a couple weeks ago, but was that really off? Like, when was the last time that you were really, really off from all that is necessary for you to do, everything that you ought to do in life? When was the last time that you were completely off and able to do everything that you wanted in a given day without having to worry about everything else that is required of you to do in life? I venture to guess that we probably can't remember a time when that was the case, when we didn't feel like there was work that always had to be done that we had to do. Because the truth is, the reality is again, there's always work to do. And yes, we were created for that work. Yes, we were created to find even joy in the work that we have to do on this earth. Yes, it can become a drudgery, as we talked about last time, work that is boring, work that is unpleasant, but work that still has to be done. But even in the midst of all of that, we can find joy in it. And now I know when we talk about this work, it's because we have to do it. And so we do it. But you see, on the flip side as well, we were not just created for work, but we were also created for rest. Right? Created for rest. But you see, we don't take a rest because we feel like we need to. It usually is the case that we end up resting because life makes us rest. Life makes us take a break because either we've gotten sick or we've gotten emotionally drained or something worse has happened in our life that has caused us to have to take a step back, to take a break, and no longer do work. And so rest never really is embarked on intentionally. We end up being forced to do it because of life and the busyness of life upon us. But yet we were created to also rest, not just work, but also to rest. And this idea is all centered on the fact that God rested. So we find in the story in Exodus 20 that God created the world in 6 days. And again, this isn't a theological interpretation of what happened in Genesis chapter 1. There are other messages and sermons about that I've talked about in the past. You can go look those up. But according to this passage, it says that God created in 6 days. And then it says that on the seventh, God rested. But we ask, well, why did God rest? Well, he rested because the work of the week was done. And so for us, we do the same thing. We try to work Monday through Friday, and we hope that the work is done. And then on Saturday or Sunday, or maybe your weekend is Wednesday, Thursday, or some other pairing throughout the week. And so you decide on those 2 days, I am going to rest. Because the idea is, and this is what the scripture says, is that we can, or I think we can read this into the scripture, is that we should be able to get all the work done we need to on the other 5 or 6 days so that we can actually take a 24-hour period of time in which we have off, in which we rest, in which we find rejuvenation in God. And so God wants us to have a Sabbath in our life. But you see, just with about everything else that God commanded his people often took it to an extreme, and often to the detriment of themselves and the people that they were leading to God. And there was one particular instance in which the Pharisees, the most legalistic group of people in Jesus' time, they see Jesus and his disciples going through a grain field. And as they go through this grain field, they pick out some grains because they're hungry. And the Pharisees get mad. They look at them and say, look, you're working. You're not supposed to be working on the Sabbath. But then Jesus turns to them and says this. He says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the idea that the Pharisees had in their mind was the first part of these, the second part of this, is that they said that they believed, or this is what the sense they're giving off, is that man was made for the Sabbath. That we were made to make it known, that we were made to keep it holy. But instead, Jesus says, no, that was never the intention. The intention was for Sabbath to be created for man, for there to be a day in which man can rest, not just men and women, humankind can rest, be rejuvenated, and ultimately find their rest and worship in God. That was the intention. But yet, as God's people have done, we make it more difficult to follow God than it needs to be. They focus a lot on what you're not supposed to do rather than what you should be doing on these days where you find rest. This 24-hour period in which you say, look, I'm taking a step back from the work that I do all week, everything that's necessary of me, and I'm going to take a step back, right? And I'm going to enjoy what God has given me, whether it's in creation or whether it's actually sitting down and worshiping God. But again, as people take it too far, take it to legalistic and restrictive sort of extremes, this is what they've done. And even churches today, I mean, we focus a lot on what we can do for God, right? What you can do for God, rather than what God has set up for you. This time where you can have Sabbath rest. But Jesus has a new way. Jesus says this. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so people had made it difficult to follow God. It said you have to do all of these things, and the Pharisees were the worst, right? They set their standard, and then they set everybody else's standard up here. So they made it hard for people to follow God. And that's still the case today. A lot of people make it difficult to follow God. But Jesus says, he says, look, when you follow me, right, the burden I'm placing on you is not difficult like that. Now, sure, there might be some requirements as we go through our life with God that, it might be difficult for us to do. But initially following God, no, there isn't anything you have to do to follow God except to believe and trust in Him and follow. So we're making it harder than it needs to be. And that's what they did with the Sabbath. They made it harder than it needs to be. This is a time that God had created for humankind to enjoy. So He provides this new way for us. And so we should rest. But I don't know if we ever actually find the rest that we really need in life. Now, I'm not a psychic, and I don't think it takes a psychic to know this, and I actually don't agree with psychics, so that's maybe a different story here. But I don't think we need to know any of that kind of stuff, or think like we know that kind of stuff, to know that you and I, that we need to rest. Sometimes we need to take a break. And that's hard for us sometimes, especially in the culture that we live in, that we feel like we can't take a break, that if we do take a break, we feel like we're a failure. We feel that we're not being productive. But that's something that we should do. That's something that God encourages us to do. And actually, He doesn't encourage you just to do it. He commands you to do it. He commands you to have a time throughout the week in which you take a step back from the work and the busyness of life. And you enjoy what God has given you. And ultimately what that leads to is our worship of God, because that's all we can do with everything that we've been gifted with, is to be able to look at God and say, God, I worship you for the things that you have given me to enjoy in this life. And in those days, we never really get to enjoy throughout the rest of the week because we're so focused on the busyness of life. So this day allows us that time to enjoy and really reflect on what God has done for us and what God has given us. But yet, we find it difficult to rest. We don't make the time to do it. But I think most of all, it's because I think resting is challenging, right? Resting is a challenging sort of thing. And it's challenging because it challenges the main assumptions of our life, right? One of the assumptions it challenges is that we're not going to get everything done. We're not going to be able to get everything that we want to get done, that we have planned for the week, and get it done in 6 days. So if we decide to have this day of rest every week, not the 2 days, but having working for 6 days and then the 1 day where we just completely take off, right? It's challenging because it tells us that very thing, that we're not going to get everything done. And that's life. That's reality. Right? And it keeps you, right, to take this time of rest, this 1 day a week, it keeps you from lying to yourself that you can actually get everything done. That you are stronger than you think, that you are not as strong as you think you are. And so it helps us to really be humble as we go through this life. So it challenges that assumption. It also challenges the assumption that the world needs us. Like maybe you feel like, well, that planets stay in orbit, that businesses stay afloat only because I am working, I am contributing to this world. But you see, when we take a Sabbath rest day, when we take a time whenever we're going to cease from working and then instead enjoy what God has given us, what this does is this keeps us from lying to ourselves that we sustain the world and God does not. And so this helps us in this way, and it challenges these things that we have long believed about our own life. That we can actually get everything done, and that the world actually needs us. It shows us how small we are in comparison to the grand scheme of things. But then it's also not just challenging, but it's also countercultural. I mean, it's not a popular thing to do, to take a rest. I mean, you go to Asian cultures, and Asian cultures are all about work, 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 work. I believe it's in Japan where you find people who actually die of being overworked. They're so tired, they're so exhausted from their work, and the culture is like all about work instead of just being. So you come here to the United States, and again, that American dream is something that's ingrained in all of us, and it's all about work, 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 so that we can get ahead in life, instead of just being, so that we can actually get to the finish line of life. And so just because it's not a popular thing to do, to rest, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So, it's challenging, it's countercultural. It's also emotionally honest, right? When we decide to take a rest, when we decide to take a break throughout the week. Jesus, you go back to Matthew 11, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." Now, he didn't say, "Come to me, everyone who's happy, everyone who's optimistic, everyone who's cheerful." No, he didn't say that. No, he says, "Come to me, those who are weary, those who are burdened." Right? It's emotionally honest. It calls us where we're at and asks us to come to Jesus, and Jesus says, "Look, I can provide you the rest that you need." Right? Not just physically, also emotionally, but also in your soul as well. So it's emotionally honest because it meets us where we're at when we decide to rest. But then also it's spiritual intimacy. That's what rest really is, because ultimately what we do, even though on these days, this 24-hour period, when we decide I'm going to rest, I'm going to rejuvenate, I'm going to follow with my God-given gifts and abilities, and take up this hobby or go fishing or do something like that, that we actually are drawing closer to God. James tells us, he says, "Come near to God, and He will come near to you." Right? On this day that we are honoring God, and I'm not just when I say that, I'm not saying that you spend this 24-hour period where you're like in prayer for 24 hours or you're fasting for 24 hours. Maybe that works for some people. But you're enjoying the gifts that God has given you. You're enjoying nature that God has given you. All of these great and perfect gifts that God has given for you to enjoy. And that might be different for many people on what that's going to entail. But ultimately, what all that day is going to lead us to is to look at God and say, "God, thank you for giving me this life." Right? And all the other 6 days of the week don't really give us that opportunity to really step back and do that. But here, and ultimately, we can worship God for all that He's done for us and all that He's given us. And so, how do we go forward from here? How do we move forward with this idea of like taking an actual day throughout the week in which we rest? Well, we've got to know and understand really what that word Sabbath is. Right? And I use it as a verb. Or we say, "Well, I'm Sabbathing." Right? Some people say that as that they Sabbath, right? That's a verb, is how they use it. They take a time of rest and relaxation and rejuvenation. But I think what a Sabbath really is to cease doing the necessary, cease doing what is required of you of life, cease from doing what you ought to do. But again, it's not just about what you shouldn't do, but then also what you should do and encouraging you to do, and embrace what is rejuvenating. Now, maybe a question we ask is, what is life-giving to you? And whatever is life-giving to you on this particular day of the week, that you take a Sabbath, that you should, and I'm encouraging you to do that. I'm encouraging you, and that's like a practical thing for you to do, is to take a day out of your week. My day is on Monday, 24-hour period, in which you say, "Look, I am going to cease from doing all work, and I am going to focus in on enjoying the things that God has given me." And that can be a lot of things. Fishing can be life-giving to you. Going on a hike can be life-giving to you. Listening to music, watching a long baseball game or football game on TV, that could be life-giving to you. When we take this time out of our week, this day that God has given us, right? It doesn't have to be Sunday, it can be any day of the week. When we take a step back and enjoy the things God has given us, and ultimately what that's going to do, that's going to lead us to the worship of God. Because that's the most important part of all of this. It's not that we just enjoy these 1 days of the week, but it's also a reminder that God has set aside a time for us to actually rest from the busyness of life. I don't know if any other worldview really provides that for us, because we're all about doing things to get closer to God. But see, in Christianity, God has, yes, he's created us for work, but he's also created us for rest. He's provided us an opportunity where we don't have to do anything. And even on the other 6 days of the week, we're having to work, but we're not having to do anything to get closer to God. All right, none of the work that you do here gets you any closer to God. You can glorify him through the things that you do. That's what we learned last week. But it doesn't earn you a better place with God. You see, you come to this seventh day or this other day, right? You still don't have to do anything, but it's a day that you can glorify God too. You don't have to work to glorify God. You can also glorify God in your resting. Taking this day out of your week and saying, God, you matter. You are important to me. Enough for me to set aside this day to be able to do that, to enjoy what you've given me, and to also turn to you and worship. And so when we do that, when we take this time to rest and have rejuvenation, to cease doing the necessary and embrace what is rejuvenating, right, we're reminded of whose we are, that we are God's. We're reminded of our purpose in the world, that ultimately, that God sustains us and God sustains our world. And that's something, those are truths to really rest in. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this time that you've given us. Thank you that you provide for us a way out of this busyness of life, that we can have a time where we can rest, we can find rejuvenation. Because without it, Lord, and I think this is why you set it into as an encouragement and a commandment to us, is that we will not finish this life well if we don't rest. We won't get to the finish line of life unless we rest. And so I'm thankful, Lord, that you command us to do this, that you command us to live this out in life. And I pray for all of us, Lord, who tend to be more workaholics than others, that we would see this as an opportunity to really lean into our relationship with you. That we can actually glorify you in this act of just stepping back and resting in your presence. So I pray, Lord, that you give us the courage to do that, the boldness to do it. Because I know for some of us that might be difficult to do. We might say, well, I can't stop working because this is not going to get done. But again, it challenges that assumption, Lord. This is the reality of life, is that we're not always going to be able to get everything done. And so, Lord, maybe some of us need to come face to face with this truth. And we ask, Lord, that you confront us with this truth even before we take that big tumble and maybe we are being forced to rest because we haven't been doing that in our life. So, Lord, we're thankful for the rest you provide, and ultimately you provide the ultimate rest for our soul in your Son, Jesus Christ. And thank you, Lord, again. In Jesus' name, amen.